What's up, you guys? Robbie is here to tell you about the Muchi Gang's visit to Boston, Massachusetts. Without further ado, I'd like to get right into the pictures we took, and I may even show a couple video clips. Here is a small child and her father standing next to a statue. Can we zoom in here? Yes, we can zoom in. There's the little girl standing next to the statues. And here is her father, holding like a sniper rifle or something. Here's a bus. Let's pretend that never happened. Our next picture is one of these things that shows how a coin. Observe how coins travel around the funnel. If you would like to read this, if you can, feel free to. This shows what will happen as it goes around. And this is Matt testing it out with his phone. Here is Dylan explaining to Seb how a spinny door works. Of course, Seb could never figure it out and didn't really fit, so he had to use this door. Here are a couple shots of the museum. The Boston Museum of Science. Here's the Education First building. You lie. Here's a cool bus. You know, if you take out the letter H and the S there. Here's a building. And here's another picture. There's something weird on the lens here. Can't really clean it though, so until I get a new camera, you're going to be seeing that. Here's a sign Seb did not follow. Here was Seb when I told him he was doing a bad job at following the instructions of that sign. Here's a bike that Seb crushed. This was the owner of the bike. Here is the Earth. Here is Seb. Here is Brent eating a pancake. Here are some more shots of the museum. Here is the Charles River. Here is a theater sign. Seb wanted me to take a picture of this. Here's an amazing shot of part of the museum. Here's Seb's ride. Here's the Charles River. Here is the Charles River. Here's a blurry restaurant. Here's the Charles River. Here's Distractionville 2.0. Here's the Sideways River. Here's the first aid room. I had to bring Seb here twice after pushing him down the stairs. The first one was musical stairs, so it sounded like dim dim dum dum. But then the second time was real stairs, so it sounded like bang 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 ow. Here are some of Da Vinci's works. He invented the clothesline, as well as the do not touch sign. He also invented Boston. Here is the bicycle with his famous do not touch sign. Here's the bullet Da Vinci also invented. Here is a cannon or something. I didn't read the description. But as you can see, his famous do not touch sign is also on this one. Over here is a tank. Wait. What the? Here is the hazmat suit, also known as the diving tank, with his signature, do not touch sign. The diving tank is actually at the top. Here is the Mona Lisa. It's fake. Here is Dylan presenting the Mona Lisa for scale. Here is Da Vinci's please touch sign. Here's a picture of an angel and something. Here is Seb. Here is a clock mechanism. Here is the double flute, or failure. Here is Seb's diaper piano. You set him inside the little basket, and he can play the piano. Along with Da Vinci's famous do not touch sign. Here is Da Vinci's steam cannon. That's it. Here's the spread gun with his famous do not touch sign. Here are the legs under the table of the Last Supper. Here is a ferret. Here is Brent posing for his wonderful Napoleon Dynamite school picture. Here's the Hall of Human Life. You walk in, and there's human life. Unless you're Seb, in which case there's ogre life. Here is the trippy ceiling. Here's the dope stairs. As you can see, there's a really weird angle there. Yeah. Here's something weird. I don't really know what that is, but it like moves in a wave. It's pretty cool. Here's the Charles River. Here is something in 4D. This is what we watched in 4D, by the way. Thomas and Friends 4D. Bubbling boilers. Oh no. Will Thomas survive? Watch this to find out. Oh, we're saving it this way. Here's Brent posing with Seb's ride. Notice how the stroller parking sign is pointing diagonally, yet Seb's stroller is in front of it. Thug life. Here's a spoon made out of spoons. Spoonception. Here's the gift of... Oh, I was reading that. Here are some men theoretically working. Hey man, you want some coke? No, I'm good. Here is a shot of the museum. Here is Seb's only friend. Here is Seb's friend's buttocks. Here is something... propeller or something. It's like... Here is a train. Not quite sure what that is. Here is the escalator mechanism. Everything's a science experiment. Here is the Charles River. Here is a police SUV. The police were called when we walked up the escalator instead of riding it. Here's the Massachusetts State Police. We turned 7 because he is an internationally wanted criminal. Here is a building. Here's another sign. Seb did not follow. Oh, hold on. We're getting... There it is. Sign number 1, Seb did not follow. No, that's sign number 2, Seb did not follow. Sign number 3, Seb did not follow. Sign number 4, Seb did not follow. Mr. Rogers Sniping Tower. Next picture. Welcome to Wonderland, pup. Here is your something. Here's something else. Here's fire alarm number 1 that Seb set off. The police were involved. Here is a billboard, legal in Massachusetts. Here is a man walking across the street. We're not quite sure what his name is, but Mr. Rogers is about to snipe him. Here's another sign Seb did not follow. He touched it. Here are our shoes. Here is Boston Common, along with the Fountain of Wonders and the Capitol. Here is the other police picture. They also showed up. There is our teacher next to the cop car. Here is Seb. Yeah, this is Seb's mugshot. As you will see here, there's really nothing there. Same over here. Here is a squirrel. No smoking, $250 fine. So Seb, of course, smokes. Here, or whatever this is, in the middle of Boston Common. Here is Brent, deep in thought. Here is a Chinese man. Yes, he is on a phone. Here is a midget next to another Chinese person. Here is the Capitol building of Massachusetts. Here's the Fountain of Wonders, featuring Dave. Here's the Clock of Wonders, featuring Dave. Here's the Shell House. Here's a person that told us not to ask her to dab. Here's the giant cool dome on the top of the building. And there's a pine cone made out of gold. Here's a fountain, once again, featuring Dave. And a clock, and some birds. Yeah, that's a pretty cool shot. Here's the clock once again. Here is a close-up of Dave, trying to get a date. This tablet is a memorial to Paul Revere. If you feel like reading this, please do. Here's the Franklin thing. Here's a slate tombstone. Here's another slate tombstone. Here's police picture number 87, seeing as the cops were called 12 times. Here is John Hancock's grave. There's the person that said special things and was pretending to be his wife. I'm huge. Here is Matt. He makes poor decisions. Here is Paul Revere's tombstone. See that penny there? That was mine. Here is Paul Revere's new tombstone. See that penny over there? That was not mine. Over here you will see some skyscrapers. Here is Samuel Adams' grave. Here's a chain. Here is a street. Here is a bike that Seb also crushed. This was the owner. This is another sign Seb failed to listen to. Here's another building. I'm fat. Here is the Paul Revere makes a ride for smoothies sign. It's famous. What do you mean you never heard of it? Here's a skyscraper. This is where Mr. Rogers snipes people from. This is a Sesame Street-ish building. This is Abby. This is Abby sabotaging my picture of the biggest building in Boston. Well, was the biggest building in Boston. Okay, so annoying person, biggest building in Boston, another building, blurry picture. Here is Seb at the site of the Boston Massacre, where he also died. This is a clock tower. These are other signs Seb failed to follow. This is King George as a building, and his pet unicorn. This is the balcony on which the Declaration of Independence was read to the people of Boston, down at the site of the Boston Massacre. This is buildings. This is that building again with the unicorn. Here's Seb's gym. Look closely. Here is our tour guide telling Dylan he's right and he should vote for Hillary Clinton. He said no. Here is a building. Here is the Plymouth County Sheriff. Here's the bank. So this was the one time Seb could actually smoke, so he just put all his cigarettes on the ground. Here is that lady again, standing in front of the Boston Correctional Facility. No, just kidding. There's Bagelville, Bake Fresh every day. This is also the scene where I asked her if she was in Vietnam, and my teacher told me to stop. Here's Brent's distorted Ziggy face. Ziggy having a Vietnam flashback. Here is Faneuil Hall. Here is the other cop that was called Quincy Market. Here is Semicircle World. Something here. This is another time the police were called. This is the police. This is Faneuil Hall. This is your Over here you'll see the back of Dylan's head, along with Greek Steve's Cuisine, or Steve's Greek Cuisine. Here's the back of Seb's head. And Boston Chowder. Here are some geodes and an Indian. Here are the other cops. Here is a dome. Here is Abby again. Here's another sign, Seb failed to follow. Here's Brent eating a corn dog. Here's the Hard Rock Cafe and a random stranger. Here's another blurry picture. I let Seb take this one, and he dropped the camera in the street. Here's something. Once again, Seb took this picture. Oh yeah, it says Hard Rock. Oh god. Here's Dylan. There's another sign. Seb failed to follow. He also didn't follow that, whatever it says. As I let Seb take this one. There's the magical clock tower of nighttime. There's Corey holding the pizza. Some stranger on the subway told him to protect it with his life. Here's Traden. I'm not quite sure. Oh, Seb didn't follow those either. This is a Boston public market. Can't really read it though. This is Seb. This is another sign Seb failed to follow. This is the person that tries to teach us music. Not quite sure what this is. Looks like someone sitting on an Asian person's face. Here is a cop. Here is a veterinarian. Here's where the cops were called again. You can't buy a better deadbolt. Here's Brent's face. He's going to lick your soul. Here's the cops again. Danger, no trespassing, third rail. Seb didn't listen to that. Bridge plate. You think Seb listened to that, guys? He didn't. Here is a 5th grader. Here's TD Garden. And, oh, the Boston Bruins. I was asking about our hockey team earlier. Here's TD Garden, North Station. Here's the Boston Tea. That guy's name is Sam. Here is some kid. There's Brent and Seb and Dylan and your mom. And here is a picture of a child. Oh, we're at the end. Alright, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed Muchi Goes to Boston. For more trips like this, subscribe and like. It really helps us. And you know what? We love it when you do that. In fact, we love it when you do that, guys. So just leave a like, subscribe. Seb loves it. You know he needs to be happy. He couldn't afford to see the Thomas in 4D because just like, guys, make him feel better. Thank you. Peace out, guys. This was Robbie, and I'm gone.